Bonjour et bienvenue à la bibliothèque Louis-Jacques. Hello and welcome to the Louis-Jacques Library. I'm your host, Tatiana Louis-Jacques, and today we'll be exploring ideas from French philosopher Jacques Derrida and how they might apply to our work as music educators. Derrida was born on July 15, 1930, in what was then French-controlled Algeria. As a Jew living during World War II, Derrida's childhood was greatly impacted by the anti-Semitic policies of the Vichy government, even being expelled from his French secondary school when he was only 12. Following the end of World War II, Derrida would move to Paris in 1949 to complete his secondary school education and study at l'École Normale Supérieure, though it did take him 2 tries to pass the entrance exam. The 1950s were an incredible time to be studying at ENS, working alongside such influential thinkers as Louis Althusser, Gilles Deleuze, Michel Foucault, Simone de Beauvoir, and Roland Barthes. This was also a time in which phenomenology was all the rage. Derrida's master's thesis, completed in 1954 and later published in 1990, drew on the work of Edmund Husserl, and his doctoral thesis was to be based on the work of Hegel, but it was never completed. I promise that will not be the case for my dissertation. Following graduation, Derrida would again take 2 tries to pass his exams, this one being the one to gain a license to teach philosophy at French universities. His first appointment would be at the Sorbonne, beginning in 1960, and in 1964 he would accept a teaching position at ENS. In 1986, Derrida would go to teach at the University of California, Irvine, and would continue to teach and lecture all over the world until his death in 2004. Derrida gained international recognition following his lecture titled Structure, Sign, and Play in the Discourse of the Human Sciences. This was given in 1966 at Johns Hopkins, a symposium based around structuralism titled The Languages of Criticism and the Sciences of Man, which was also attended by Roland Barthes and Jacques Lacan. They both also presented. Structuralism was a popular method of analysis in many disciplines that worked to understand how meaning was produced and uncover the central organizing principles that structure our world and our lives. For example, the structural linguistics of Ferdinand de Saussure gives us the notion of sign as a combination of a signified idea or concept represented by a verbal or written signifier. We English speakers would call a certain adorable, small 4-legged mammal with fur and tail and whiskers a cat. The sign cat doesn't refer to a specific instance of cat, but rather the concept, and is represented by the sound made and picture one imagines when hearing or seeing the combination of the letters C-A-T. And since a French speaker would refer to the same concept as chat, or a Spanish speaker would say perro, we come to understand that cat itself has no intrinsic meaning. At the end of the day, we know what a cat is because it's not a dog, a turtle, or a trumpet. Not because cat means anything itself. In other words, given the fact that multiple signifiers can be used to represent a particular signified, their actual relationship proves to be quite arbitrary, and the meaning of any sign comes from how it relates and contrasts to other signs. Our ability to identify meaning comes from our knowledge and understanding of the English language for its structure. Going back to Derrida, Structure, Sign, and Play brings together the work of Friedrich Nietzsche, Sigmund Freud, and Martin Heidegger to reconsider this structural method of interpreting meaning. He challenges the concept of the center, arguing that while used to stabilize structure, the center also serves to restrict them. Derrida also critiques the nature-culture binary on which the work of structural anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss is built. Nature, the privileged side of this binary, would be something universal, spontaneous, and free, while culture is the systems of norms and rules that vary from one society to another. Derrida, however, sees human life as much more complex, and its features as not all living neatly within either category. So, rather than simply accepting the binary terms we are given to understand our world, he argues we have to instead systematically question. This systematic questioning involves concepts that will go on to define Derrida's career, including difference, trace, supplements, and deconstruction. Further, his use of these ideas to analyze and critique would inspire many and anger countless others. In 1999, he was voted the most overrated philosopher in the world. Over the coming decades, Derrida would go on to publish over 40 books, with 1967 alone bringing us Writing Indifference, which is a collection of essays, Speech and Phenomena, and of Grammatology. To go into detail on all of Derrida's work would require perhaps multiple semesters of university philosophy classes, definitely more than one podcast episode. There's his writing on the impossibility of unconditional hospitality, complete forgiveness, or a true gift, given our constantly and forever changing criteria for success. For me, this sparks the question of how comfortable are we, or can we become, with the idea that best practices are a myth and that failure will always and forever be a possibility. We could also interrogate what he means when saying, quote, "I am by profession a philosopher, a teacher of philosophy, but I am not a philosopher through and through." How does that relate to how we define ourselves as musicians and music educators? Alas, for the remainder of our time, I'm going to focus on perhaps Jacques Derrida's biggest contribution to the humanities and social science, deconstruction. Defining deconstruction is a bit tricky. Not only does Derrida himself never provide us a definition, but deconstruction is kind of a criticism of the very language that we need to use to explain it. When asked, Derrida would say things like, quote, "Deconstruction is not a method and cannot be transformed into one." That deconstruction is both structuralist and anti-structuralist, and that it would be better to focus on what deconstruction is not, or rather ought not to be. Take this passage from Deconstruction in a Nutshell. "The very meaning and mission of deconstruction is to show that things, texts, institutions, traditions, societies, beliefs, and practices of whatever size and sort you need, do not have definable meanings and determinable missions, that they are always more than any mission would impose, that they exceed the boundaries they currently occupy. What is really going on in things, what is really happening, is always to come. Every time you try to stabilize the meaning of a thing, to fix it in its missionary position, the thing itself, if there is anything at all to it, slips away." Now, all that being said, I see deconstruction to be a way of interrogating any given text, system, or structure, seeking out the assumptions that might have been made, the tensions that might be present, or any contradictions that are at play. Starting at what is assumed to be the center of a text, you follow and highlight the gaps or faults in the established structure, flipping any internal boundaries and reorganizing hierarchies. Decentering allows understanding to instead come from the previously marginalized elements, establishing a new center that is as unstable as the conventional one. Though many people take this asking of questions, this close examination, to be a hostile act, deconstruction is not a negative or malicious procedure. As Gayatri Spivak writes in the introduction to her renowned translation of Grammatology, to deconstruct something, as opposed to destroy it, implies the possibility of rebuilding. Even more, by taking something apart, we may come to notice what was being left in the margins, intentionally or unintentionally undervalued. So, how might it look to apply this Derridian method of deconstruction within the field of music education? For me, it means to do the work to identify any hidden contradictions in what we claim to value and what we actually do in the classroom. It means exploring possible alternatives through the ongoing and never-ending process of questioning our norms and values. What ways of knowing have music educators historically privileged? Whose perspectives do we currently privilege? How does the work we do change when what we privilege changes? Why are certain musics kept on the margins while others are celebrated? How do we determine whose music is worthy of being taught? The purpose of asking these questions, and others like them, is not to say that music education as it exists now is inherently bad, oppressive, or needing to be destroyed. Rather, these axiological, value-based questions and the dialogues that can then arise let us work to truly understand our values and motivations, in turn allowing our actions to truly reflect what we believe. Deconstructing the way in which competition structures school music programs allows us to see how our actions are or are not benefiting our students long term. Deconstructing the way music educators are taught to program concerts may shed light on the fact that some voices are rarely heard while others are hogging the microphone. Deconstructing the type of music offerings in primary versus secondary schools may lead to more students being able to share interests and talents that we didn't know they had and contribute to our musical communities in ways they weren't able to before. So, I ask you, what musical practices might you work to deconstruct? Where might you open forms that were previously closed? What institutional structures could you begin to dismantle and build anew? Deconstruction works not to bring about an end, but rather open up greater possibilities. Thank you for visiting the Louis-Jacques Library. I hope to see you again.